Silvopasture for healthy watershed and soils. And you're
Thanks,
on
Ginger.
next.
Awesome. Thanks, Ginger. Thanks, Jason. Thanks to all the friends. Happy to be here. I am here to just tell you a little bit about what we are doing up on Mount Warner. A little background. For those of you in Hadley, you're familiar with Mount Warner, the hill, historically the site of apple growing for now about 160 years. And I'm lucky enough to be finding myself there a lot, working both for owners, Jonathan Carr and Nicole Blum, Carr's Cider House, and the actual farm. Not necessarily the cider imprint is, now sort of being referred to as preservation orchards, or new start to this whole agricultural practice up on that site. If any of you have been up there in the past, let's see, 4 years, you'll have known that there's been quite a few changes. Old overgrowth and wasteland, sproutland, really heavy with vine growth, and agriculturally unproductive territory has been really worked back towards productive silvopasture, which is the focus of what I want to talk to you guys about, and the focus of basically the overarching vision for this, which is, a multi-purpose land use kind of experiment geared towards producing healthy tree fruit and nuts with no chemical intervention, and also supporting grazing animals. A herd of grazing sheep is the current focus, and we've worked in some pastured poultry into the system. So I guess this is a little bit of a contrast or a break with what everybody else has been talking about, sort of talking from a production agriculture standpoint, but from an ecological perspective, in contrast with some of the more overarching watershed and hydrology concepts. But I'm going to just show some pictures. Most of my slideshows that I make are just photos, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what you're seeing. So most of the things I'm going to show you is specifically about our silvopasture practice. And so for those of you to whom this is a new concept, silvopasture simply refers to the intentional combination of livestock. This can take a number of different forms, and tree crops. So, there's a lot of diversity in what those models can look like. Mostly in the United States at this point, these systems are being integrated with large grazing animals, so primarily cattle and timber plantings, rather than some of these more alternative, I guess, spins on silvopasture, which is something that we are doing here. As I mentioned earlier, Mount Warner, historically the site of apple growing, pear growing, just pome fruits, traditional orchards, as well as sheep, which is the focus of myself and my partner, Rachel Haas. We have our fledgling grass-fed lamb and poultry business now called meadow-fed lamb that's operating at Preservation Orchard. And what you see here is our group of ewes who are feeding on woody perennials. This particular photo is just sort of introductory, but just to give you an idea of the various types of forage that's growing on the orchard. So this area is kind of interesting, has a unique history of cultivation. Obviously, we have remnants of indigenous agriculture up there in terms of the species that we are finding, growing in profusion in the pastures, things like ostrich fern, asparagus, generally, known as food crops, but also some more obscure wild food plants like Apios americana, aka groundnut. There's kind of a lot of substance there that we need to just take a lot of time to understand in greater detail. But as the fragmentation of those long-term ecosystems that were on this site have kind of collapsed, like the chestnut tree blight had a big impact on all the northeastern forests, but definitely on this site as well. There have been a lot of ecological niches opened up with the repeated soil disturbance, including that most recently in 2017, where we have huge amounts of vine growth and unwanted sproutland converted back into what I would consider, productive pasture that we're using for grazing. In a rotational method, we move our animals to new grass every 1 to 2 days, yielding really high quality forage growth and effective grazing, rather than the sort of continuous style of grazing where animals just dwell in the same area for a long time. I'm going to switch to a new shot to show you more of the focus of what I want to talk about, which is integration of the fruit producing trees, as well as the grazing animals. So on a basic level, growing apples, by the books I mean based on agricultural best practices as issued by University of Massachusetts Extension, as well as basically all literature has been published, recognizes the sole land use function for a given area that's planted with apple trees as being just to raise apples, when in reality the land that apple trees are growing on are part of a larger ecosystem. All food systems that include fruit or nut-bearing trees have a lot going on in the understory, and that's only one component, not even to mention the possibly other ecosystems going on fungally or within the soil. But most of the time you have a carbon dioxide sort of problem with just mowing down excess undergrowth at least 2 to 3 times during the growing season before apples get harvested. This is a almost unavoidable in the apple industry. You don't really see this very often, but one way to minimize the cost input basically for keeping the understory clean. When I say clean, I mean just free of vegetation that would make it stress trees for nutrient resource availability, water uptake, etc., is keeping this understory nice and clean. So we've been using our sort of elbow grease and clever can-do attitude to try and find ways that we can integrate them safely without causing harm to the trees, and also finding ways that we can use grazing sheep as a tool, and that has come up in a couple of different ways. One of which is you can see sort of, I'm going to move my cursor over the tree on the left here in the foreground, but there's a few cut marks. If you look closely, you can see. So summer pruning is something that we do for a couple reasons: to monitor bacterial diseases like fire blight, which is very common common disease in orchards. I come from a tree physiology and pruning background, and so that's something that I've spent a lot of time in this orchard doing, is monitoring for things like fire blight, and then to lesser extent lesser diseases that can cause issues during the summer, and actually harvesting that diseased material and offering that to the grazing herds as they move through the aisleways. What they do is they metabolize the diseased plant material, moving through their digestive system. They actually dispense with that in a non-chemical way, and they derive nutrition from it. So you're sort of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And that's kind of the whole idea with Silvopasture, is turning your byproduct or your waste into another possible gain. So as they move through these aisleways, they're depositing manure and helping the trees keep nice, lush foliage, good productive vegetative growth, and good return bloom, meaning that the year after a big crop, you can see in this photo, this is from earlier this year, you have a very, very big crop on the trees this year. You need to make sure that the trees have adequate nutrition for return bloom, meaning flower buds for the following year. So in this way, we're also looking out for the additional sort of carbon footprint of synthetic fertilizer that is generally just sort of thought of as a necessity in commercial apple growing. That there's a fertility program, which is usually not non-organic in most cases due to the cost problem there. This is a great way that we can, for a little bit of extra labor, trade in that for I think a cleaner and more desirable nutrient package for the health of the orchard. Additionally, apple trees provide a lot of different shade and windbreak benefits for our sheep. So we're back to the group of ewes now. The former photo was all the males, our rams. Now we're out of apples and into chestnuts. So a little bit of the sort of area that you're looking at here. This is the chestnut block at Preservation Orchard. And that is, if you are familiar with riparian buffers and how those are structured in relationship to bodies of water, this is sort of, I guess you could consider this one sort of set of fields away from the actual water's edge of Lake Warner. The parcel actually extends to the water's edge, and we were sort of thinking about how agricultural practices on this particular site are going to have an effect, an immediate and evident effect on the health of the watershed. And so luckily we're in the business of planting trees, which is a great way to secure water, minimize surface runoff, hold soil where it needs to be. But I did mention earlier in our my spiel here that this is a site of great disturbance. And I say disturbance meaning that there have been a lot of changes in this landscape, including very recently some serious ones where a lot of trees were removed with the plan to replace those trees with things that are more desirable for various reasons. But as a result of that, the soil is incredibly active fungally. Mycorrhizal fungus is really, really present. We're very lucky for that because that has the knock-on effect of helping us get through really dry spells. We haven't had that issue this year, but for those of you who don't have that kind of background with tree crops and decaying roots, but white fungus, mycorrhizal fungi, those are things that help soil retain moisture. And I'm not going to speak at it from a really scientific point of view here, but just as a practical understanding of what that does for us is, when you are to remove a tree or even prune off a branch of a tree, a corresponding root and whatever roots are left behind if a tree is actually removed. But even when you prune a branch off, a corresponding root beneath the soil starts to decay and die back. That dieback starts to feed soil microbes, bacteria, and fungus, most notably classification of fungus known as mycorrhizal fungi. There's hundreds of species that make that up. Some are visible, some are invisible when you actually take out like a decaying root from the ground. Those are really important. We're gaining more understanding about the role of mycorrhizae in sequestration of carbon dioxide within the soil, as well as just more practical things we really feel the effects of in an immediate sense, like water retention. So we're trying to take advantage of the mycorrhizal fungi that are basically there from the huge amount of woody perennial plants that were removed from this site, and try and establish some new roots in there in a sort of grazing and pruning regime that makes sense for maximizing the amount of grip on the soil that we can have in terms of minimizing surface water runoff, because as you know, I mean, it's a small slope, but it is a slope nonetheless that drains directly into the water. We want to make sure that we're capturing nutrients, locking them in place so that the pastures and the tree crops that we're growing are going to get the most of that. So I thank my other half for being sort of a continual subject in these photos. Back to the apple trees. I wanted to show a couple photos just of what basically a before and after that they're doing or what we're looking at within the basically system of the orchard, what we want to start with and what we want to end with. In the space of about a day, they'll take unmown understory and turn it into something that we're very satisfied with leaving behind and then moving to the next aisleway. So we actually install this electronet fencing right up to the trunks of the trees and basically enclosing just the aisleway. We don't want the sheep getting anywhere really close to the tree trunks because they're surprisingly browsy, willing to eat bark and twigs and leaves of trees, which we don't mind so much about the leaves of trees, but we want them to leave the bark and the vascular tissue of the trees alone. So this is about halfway through eating, but I think I have another couple good photos. I'm wondering why I can't, too far. So this is right when they've moved into a fresh lane And you can see how close we get that netting right up to the trees, so we can get every blade of grass and get the nutrition and manure deposited right under the drip lines of these trees. And this, by the way, is a dwarf orchard. We also have newer plantings that are not quite past establishment growth yet, that are going to be much larger trees when they become mature. But as an example, it's easy to see sort of before, and then I'll go to the next photos after. You can see Rachel, my partner, is walking through a freshly mown aisleway there, and the next one over, and they're going to do the same thing. This takes them about 24 hours, and we move them very quickly. And so you can see that the rate of regrowth, if you look all the way at the left of the photo, the two aisleways, I'll put my cursor over it so I can hopefully help you guys highlight that. But the farthest aisleways where you see those rows of trees, those are much greener. So that's the rate of regrowth that you're going to see even after one pass of grazing. A lot of this nutrition and manure is super bioavailable to the plants, and they're going to uptake that pretty quickly, especially in rainy years. So the lane that Rachel's walking through, that was grazed probably a day or two prior, and then you can imagine the same rate. So this frequent rotation also begets rapid regrowth and makes it so we can cycle through a bit more effectively. And so I want to talk about one quickly before I sort of get ready for questions, but talk about one of the challenges that we have as livestock producers in the Northeast. We have a short growing season. You can't graze through the winter because snow starts to pile up, and that's kind of a big issue. So everyone in the Northeast who's ever had animals understands you have to have hay. So you have to pack up the grass on the field, dry it down, put it in bales, and put it in a barn. That's one way to do it. We've done that with, good success. We have the ability to cut hay on the orchard itself, but it's a challenge because you don't always have the best weather for making hay. This year is a good example of that. Also, it cuts away at the land function. You can't really stack too many land functions with hay. You can't really hay effectively in rows of trees. And that's something that we're very, we're pretty committed to growing trees, and because of the shade that those trees cast, they're going to really dumb down your ability to dry grass effectively. And so for a number of years, I've been following tree fodder principles, and we've talked a little bit about the benefits of that with the apple trees, but that's just one example where you can actually feed animals either the fresh or dried leaves of trees, including woody parts, stems, tender twigs. That's all really good for them. A lot of people don't really understand that's sort of part of the ancient practice of raising animals. Has, it's not just grass. It's really a wider picture of fodder that they're able to take in. So I'm going to flash this photo. This is sort of an alternative to the idea of grass hay. And this is a mulberry tree that has been pollarded. So pollards, if you guys are hip to that term, basically means trees that are repeatedly pruned at the same sites, causing scar tissue to form. Several species are really good examples of this type of growth, but mulberries are one that has really caught on for thousands and thousands of years across, I don't know, at least 4 of the 7 continents. They are really widely adaptable genus. They have great fruit qualities, great leaf qualities, and so things from silk mulberries to, sheep and pig and cattle fodder and chicken feed have all been derived from various parts of the mulberry tree. And this is basically what a mulberry tree looks like when you establish it and then start to prune it in this way, where you cut the same sites, forcing 1-year-old growth. And mulberries are nice because they can actually produce those lovely berries on the 1-year-old wood instead of just older wood like with apples. Those are only 2-year-old wood, 4-year-old wood, and so our pruning regimes sort of follow that. But with this, what you can do is gain a fruit harvest in the summertime when mulberries start to come off the trees, late June, all through July. If you have a very nice variety, sometimes you'll be lucky and get them into August. And then following that, your leaf material is at its peak nutritive state at that point in the late summer, and you shear off with a pair of secateurs or a pair of loppers or something, or sometimes even more autonomous mechanical equipment has been devised for this in highly commercialized systems. But harvesting that leaf fodder, harvesting all these twigs and basically drying those can be done much more effectively in indoor settings than trying to dry hay It has to be done outdoors with the cooperation of the weather, which is always ever more unpredictable. And additionally, when you remember what I was talking about, mycorrhizal fungi, the relationship between pruning trees and the decaying of roots beneath the soil, which, by the way, is locking stable carbon in the form of organic matter and biomass beneath the soil. When you establish tree systems that harness pollarding as basically a pruning concept, a management regime, what you're doing is causing tons of really, really vigorous root growth, constantly trimming that back on a 2-year cycle, getting a really, really great production of those mycorrhizal fungi within the soil. So it looks kind of ugly to some people to prune trees this way, but it's actually very effective in improving the quality of soil, improving the capacity of soils to sequester carbon. And you're also gaining the benefit, if you do your homework and you understand your species that you're working with, you can get great fruit off of these kinds of mulberry trees, as an example. And additionally, sequester a little bit of additional animal fodder. So for those late winter days when you've got very little hay left in the barn and you need to feed your animals until the pastures start to grow in New England, then you've got this sort of in your back pocket too. So we are looking really forward to installing some more, I guess, alternative tree crop systems like mulberry pollards on the property, especially in the sites that have been used as hay fields and currently don't have any meaningful amount of living tree roots locking soil, minimizing surface water runoff, etc. And there's a couple sloping areas on the farm where we're designing plantings for 2022 and 2023 at the moment. So we have that to look forward to. And yeah, I love Silvopasture. Been kind of dreaming about integrating systems like this since I was an undergrad at Hampshire College, and to get to talk to you guys about it. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, I don't know if we're going to do this in the chat or if you guys want to just shout it out since this is the last one of the afternoon. But anyway, I'm cool with whatever. And yeah, thanks.
That's awesome, Matt. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me to talk. think there was a question down here, Matt.
Yeah, hi. I was just curious if you've had trouble with any noxious weeds, how you address like horse nettle or.
Oh, interesting you asked, because we are dealing with that right now, and it's lose a little bit of sleep over the horse nettle specifically. We've seen a massive influx of that in the last year. And we have several theories as to why it's establishing. One working theory based on the locality and intensity of sort of where we have an epicenter of horse nettle growing, which is, for those of you who don't know that plant, it's a highly toxic nightshade plant related to tomatoes and eggplants and belladonna, a deadly nightshade that are just really highly toxic to humans and livestock. They grow very effectively from rhizome, so mowing it doesn't eliminate the plant, it just sort of weakens it. Anyway, we are taking sort of an aggressive approach to this epicenter area where we're actually going to, we had started planting orchard there, but it did poorly, partly due to like predation issues. We have a lot of deer and voles in this area that I think took hold, the rodents part, that was due to the soil disturbance, but deer are a major player there. And so they ruined the tree planting. And so we're just going to yank the trees from there, transplant them into a different orchard block, and actually try and bear fallow this field where the horse nettle is most aggressive, because again, mowing is basically the only non-chemical option that you have, and you have to mow it at repeated intervals. If you turn a herd of sheep loose on it and they end up eating any of it, they'll have serious health effects. And if you turn a herd of sheep loose on it and they just eat around it, then you'll basically have tons of seed of this noxious weed maturing. So it's a bit of a tricky one, because we want to at all costs avoid using glyphosate and dicamba, which the UMass extension Ringeling has that is basically your only option in terms of eliminating horse nettle and losing pasture to it. So we're basically going to use tillage and aggressive bare fallowing and cover cropping to try and at least knock it back to the point where manual elimination beyond that, with either close mowing with the scythe or just pulling it by hand, pulling deep rhizomes by hand at that point, is going to be what we end up having to do to make meaningful change around that. Other than that, we have tons of noxious weeds like poison ivy and bittersweet. None of those are toxic to sheep, and they eat them with impunity and great pleasure, actually. So it's nice to watch them gobble up poison ivy. It's actually pretty satisfying to watch. But horse nettle is a tricky one. We're still, I guess, in the midst of it. So if you have any tips, happy to hear about that.
I would, well, it's not going to go down to glyphosate, but the things that I've heard about tilling it would indicate that that's not a solution, unfortunately. Yes, I don't know. I've been asked to deal with it on a pasture and research the different ways of doing it, and it does seem like some of the other herbicides are the only option.
Yeah, some of the other aggressive herbicides are also things that will kill tree crops because of their soil activity. The dicamba is the one that Randall Prostek of UMass Extension has said, this is your only bet. And they all have scary labels named like crazy firearms like rifle and like total killer, kind of crazy stuff like that. But these are all things, if you spray them and they even drift a little bit onto apple trees, they'll kill the apple tree too. So it's not really in our dossier of options. So at the moment, we're sort of try and walk a line between aggressive mowing post bloom to exhaust the root reserves of the plant, as well as possibly selective tillage with long bare fallowing, so possibly even multiple year bare fallowing, with repeated tillage to try and exhaust those root reserves before establishing a new cover, and then additionally trying to develop some resistance within the grazing herd and try to select for animals that either less sick or show no ill effects from consuming the plant, which is more of a long-term vision. But it is documented that some animals can eat it with impunity. So we'll hopefully be selecting towards that in the future with our sheep breeding and selection.
Just one last, if you did the glove of death herbicide application, I know the herbicides that will take out horse nettle, and they are a little hotter than glyphosate, but you could still use either a hood or use, the glove of death. I don't know if you're familiar with that technique, but
yeah. That minimizes drift, obviously. Yeah.
What they're about now, because I didn't know what the heck was going on.
Yeah,
All right,
it's
so
all good.
yeah. Well, thank you, all of you. I think we need to move on. It says here in my little schedule that there is a mandatory mentor check-in in the Zoom breakout rooms starting now from 1:30 to 2:15. So tell your friends and colleagues to sign up for the innovation contest through Eventbrite. It is never too late, and have a great day. Thank you so much to all of you.